Okay. Well, I have the great pleasure of being here today with Sarah Marshank. Sarah, thank you so much. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
Good. Me too. I'm super happy to be here.
So, we were actually connected through a mutual friend and colleague, and we came to find out just by happenstance that we grew up basically in the same area, went to the same high school, although not at the same time. Shout out to WBHS, West Bloomfield High School in Michigan. But I'm wondering if we can start all the way back because you've had a very interesting and fascinating life and journey. And I want to walk through each of those steps with you briefly, but take us back to the beginning to where you grew up. What was life like for you growing up? Who was in the house? Was there a religious or spiritual context? Just give us a little bit of a flavor as to where your journey started.
Sure. I love the opportunity to create context. I think it's super important. So I was born in the early 60s in Detroit, and in 1968 when martial law happened in Detroit, my father decided it would be a good idea to get his small family out of Detroit and into the suburbs. So that's how we did our pilgrimage. We immigrated from Detroit to Southfield and then to West Bloomfield, which is the town that we both share. And I was raised in a traditionally conservative household, Jewish. And what that looked like was I went to private school, private Hebrew day school, and learned Hebrew and practiced Judaism in a very cultural sense and a very ritual sense, somewhat lacking of spirit, which we might get to in our conversation today. I'm one of five kids. I'm the second oldest. I have three brothers and a sister. I left West Bloomfield for Ann Arbor to the University of Michigan. And I went there for about 2.5 years and had a fabulous experience on a literature program out in New Hampshire that was run by these old hippies. And we read Emerson and Thoreau, and we did a solo overnight in nature, and we made music and cooked food. And I had this sense that there was more to life than my sheltered suburban Jewish upbringing, and I decided to move to California, and I dropped out of school, much to my father's chagrin, as you might imagine. And I moved to Santa Cruz, and I lived there for a little over a year, got my residency, went back to school, and graduated in alternative education from the University of California, Santa Cruz. And so from there, I took this kind of road through my career as an educator, but was deeply searching for something that I couldn't necessarily articulate at the time. You and I might say a search for meaning or purpose, an understanding of what it means to be human, or what's a soul, does it even exist, all that kind of stuff. And the short version of the story is I ended up back in Michigan after I finished my undergraduate degree and went back to Judaism, to my roots. And I studied in yeshiva and became Orthodox and lived in New York and was able to study Kabbalah, and didn't quite feel like it was the fit for me, which is also another conversation, and ended up meeting a gentleman who lived out in Oregon, who was also from New York, a Jewish guy from New York, who was determined to apply practice to the discovery of what it means to be a human. And what I mean by that is he was dedicated and devoted to more of a Zen approach to meditation and mindfulness. He was a radical character in regards to austerities, and he was kind of like from another time. So he lived very simply. There was no television. Those days, there were no cell phones. So we had a phone, but no answering machine. And he practiced meditation and studied every tradition, and was silent a lot and fasted a lot and was celibate. And I met him through a mutual friend, and I ended up taking a year sabbatical to live with him to practice. And then 10 years later, I decided it was time for me to come back in the world. And I've been out here playing around, integrating what happened for me in that retreat, which I'm happy to share more about, for the last 20 years, and have given birth to a body of work that offers a framework for self-discovery and self-knowledge, that I was able, as an educator, to craft based upon my, PhD in retreat, you know, and here we are today.
I'd love to dive more into that retreat with you. And I actually was hoping just to go back to the initial threshold where you decided to go on this retreat. It sounds like you were definitely asking these deeper questions all along, even starting back at U of M or before that. And there was these questions coming out for you in a search to understand meaning and purpose. Um, what was the draw? You met this person and he was doing this in a very committed way, a very extreme way, we might say, at least relative to how we live in the world. And was there something just in you? Were you at a, I don't want to say a crisis point, maybe a curiosity point, we might say, to really dive deep? Like what was that made you want to take this really deep dive versus just like, going to a monastery now and then and weaving in a little bit of mindfulness into your life, which I think is the route that most people end up taking.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So, a little more context. In my early 20s, I became pregnant, unintentionally pregnant, once with a boyfriend of mine, and I ended that pregnancy very consciously and willfully. And something was touched through that pregnancy and that abortion inside of me. And maybe some of the listeners can resonate with that or relate to that. And so I felt like I felt like I needed to understand what I had just chosen to do, because the outcome of what I chose didn't feel like what I anticipated it would feel like relief or clarity. And then so that's when that was the first threshold of like, okay, I got to figure this out, because whoa, that was not fun. And if I'm gonna have kids, I need to be clear and I need to make that decision clearly, not haphazardly. And then I started searching, and I got involved with a Rastafarian man. And I've written about this in my memoir. It's called Being Selfish: My Journey from Escort to Monk to Grandmother. The escort part hadn't happened yet in the story, but it's coming. And so I went and started to study with him, which was super interesting because he has a connection to the Jewish lineage. And in the process of studying with him, I started to get really excited about, whoa, there are people who have really been thinking about these. It sounds kind of silly, right? People have been thinking about this stuff for like thousands of years, and some of them actually have some decent answers, besides the little tricklings of wisdom from Judaism that I was able to receive as a child growing up. And then this Rastafarian man decided that we were supposed to have sex in order to achieve some sort of deepening in our work together. And I can just feel all the listeners going, "Oh God, Sarah, you're kidding, right?" No, not one of those. And the answer is yes, one of those. And oh my gosh, Matt, I swear, we had sex one time, the condom broke, and I was pregnant again.
Wow.
Right. So there's the real initial threshold and breakdown, you could say. Like, oh my God, you're kidding me? You're kidding me, right? That was my response to life. You're kidding me. I just told you I need to figure this out before I do this. And now you're making me make a choice again that I have no idea how to make. And here's the thing that I feel is a thread that is carried through my life and my work. It wasn't so much that I was searching for the right answer. I was searching for the right way inside of myself to make the right decisions for me.
Hmm.
And that was the critical piece. And so the second pregnancy forced me, and I had a couple weeks to get there. It wasn't like I'll go into retreat and I'll figure it out. Either I'm having this child or I'm not. With a man I don't love, I don't have, shared history with, so foreign to me in so many ways. And so I decided to end that pregnancy as well. And that pretty much crushed me. And that's when I started seeking in earnest. Like, if I don't figure this out, I don't want to be here. I was ready to leave. But I felt I had enough faith in myself and in life that I could figure it out. That's the goodness some of the goodness I got from my family, which is the confidence that I could, if I applied myself to something, succeed at it, and that I was worthy of that. And so your question about what was it when I met Sam, that kind of invoked this movement to get really serious like him, was that there was a window in there of about 5 years after the second abortion that I studied yoga and went into therapy and studied Native American tradition and became Orthodox for a while and all of that. So I was already starting to seek and explore. And when I met Sam, he basically said to me, if you really want to figure out the answer to that question inside of you, all you need to do is sit down and shut up and listen for a while. Stop listening to everybody else. What do you think? What do you think the Buddha said? He went and sat under the Bodhi tree, right? Go sit under the Bodhi tree. Stop, running off to sweat lodges and yoga classes, but really be with yourself and sit with yourself. And I remember saying to him, yeah, great. Okay. Well, who's going to pay for my student loans and my health insurance and my rent? And he said, come for a year and I'll cover it. And you just do the practice. And I went and visited him for a month in the summer just to feel if he was another lunatic that I needed to stay away from. And
Smart.
right. And I decided that he wasn't, though there are certainly people who would challenge that. And I came back for a year, took a sabbatical. I was teaching at the time at an alternative school in Ann Arbor, and anticipated a year. And then 10 years later is when I got the clarity it was time to leave and return to the world. And yeah, so that's kind of how that threshold appeared. It was pure grace, as so much of our hero and heroines' journeys are, once we feel that burning intention and desire to wake up, grow up, show up, whatever we want to call that, know ourselves, figure out our purpose or the meaning of life. Life responds to that call.
Hmm. Yeah, you really took the words right out of my mouth. This sounds so much like a hero or heroine's journey, you answering that call, and in a very deep way. I really love the way that you phrase it or are thinking about what you were doing on retreat there, as far as looking for answers to questions not outside of you, but inside. And I think the way you said it was like actually like I was looking for how do I listen to myself to get really good at that process, not answering one single question, but how do I become so quiet and still and intimate with myself that I can then tune into this inner compass and then be able to make better decisions going forward in life. So that's really awesome. I like that a lot.
That's it. Yeah. Yep.
So you were there for 10 years. So paint a picture for us. What did this look like on a daily basis? What were you doing or what were you not doing while you were there? And Sam, just to clarify, Sam is the person that you were living with during this period, correct? And
Correct.
practicing with. Okay, gotcha.
Correct. Sam had family money that he was living off of, which was super helpful. And he bought some land in Southern Oregon, in kind of pretty rural, and was just devoting his life to his practice. So for me, what I did when I was living there mostly, and you'll appreciate this as a meditator, and that is that I remember when I first started meditating, I couldn't sit still for more than 3 minutes. It was just a joke. And I was already doing yoga and doing a lot of other quote unquote spiritual things, but this capacity to just sit still with myself was so hard. It
Yeah.
was just so hard. So when I met Sam, I was like, whoa, like if I hung out with him, I would just be meditating a lot, like all day, some days for days on end. And how else do you train to learn something new but to do it, and to do it with somebody who knows how to do it and somebody who will call you forth in that way? And I have this competitive drive in me as well. And so I felt like, okay, if he's going to sit 4 hours a day, I'm going to sit 4 hours a day. Right. So, which was really kind of generative for me to have that kind of competitive drive. And so we spent a lot of time meditating, and pretty much in a Zen fashion, though I would say now, as I teach it and as I practice, it's also kind of like Vipassana meditation. So there's this sense of um, working towards that stillness and quiet and presencing the thoughts and feelings that surface, but also an opening to a bigger field of awareness. And maybe we'll unpack that a little bit more. But in order to support that meditative practice, we were often silent for the longest silence I practiced was 3 months of not speaking. But we would every week not speak for a day or two. We also fasted regularly, which was another, not for health reasons, but for discipline and attention practice. And pranayama, which is yogic breathing practices, mostly again to prepare us for long meditation practices. And then we had a garden and we would go into town for food. And I spent a lot of time walking in nature and contemplating. And then the rest of our time we would study. We would study and talk about basically all the different cosmologies and philosophies around what's the purpose of life, how did we get here, is there a soul, what is it? So we had a lot of different teachers, but none of them in the flesh. They were all through their written word, which is the grace of us living in these times, but can also be disorienting if one doesn't have somebody who, has a little bit more experience or a little bit broader perspective to kind of keep you on track. There's a beautiful polarity there, the tension between having a teacher and being on your own, and having discipline and being spontaneous. So we were constantly playing with those edges. And it was super beautiful. It was it was hard on in many ways to confront myself at that level and to detox from, shopping and television. And nowadays it would be cell phones, but then it wasn't. And all the things in life that call to us. And I'll share one little story about that, which is I remember early on when I got there, I said to Sam one day, I need to go shopping. I just need to go shopping. And he's like, why? What do you need to go shopping for? I'm like, I just need to, like, stop trying to control me. Stop trying to make me do all these things. He's like, go shopping. Let's go. He said, but one thing when we go, if you're willing. I said, sure. He said, we're going to go to the mall and we're going to walk around and you're not going to buy anything today. I just want you to go. We'll walk together. You can try on things. I want you to observe the self in you that thinks she needs to go shopping. And that's how we oriented pretty much towards everything in life. Was let's take a closer look at that drive and see if it's really bringing us what we long for.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I want to get into those components because that really kind of leads us into your model, looking at the self, but also these other aspects, the witness and source, and those are the three elements, from what I understand, of the selfistry model. So, and I just wanted to say that I really love the name because not just because it's it's a nice play like self and artistry, but it's focused on the self aspect of that model versus the witness or the source. And I know we'll dive into these. And that can seem a little bit counterintuitive for a practice or a teaching that is rooted in spirituality that often tends to transcend the self. But the way that you work with people very much values and incorporates the self into that. So I just wanted to name that up front. But maybe it would be helpful to kind of look at these three elements within the model and just kind of explain what they are.
Well, it is interesting that the name for it ended up having the self in it for exactly what you're pointing towards, and I really appreciate your attention to that. Um, the fundamental teaching, let's say in Advaita Vedanta, which is a Hinduism, a line in Hinduism, and Buddha, another in Buddhism, mostly Theravadan Buddhism. And I just want to put out a disclaimer. I am not an expert in any of these traditions. I am a passionate learner of all of them. So I just want to put that out there. My understanding and my study of Vipassana and of Theravadan Buddhism is basically that there is no self. And that's the fundamental teaching there. And often I would say the misunderstanding of that is, therefore, we need to transcend it. We need to transcend this illusion of a self. We need to transcend this obsession with our selfhood in order to become the no self. Now, in selfistry, the source realm represents the no self realm. It represents the realm of the Holy Spirit, of the Great Spirit, of the mystery, by whatever name, right? And so it is present in the framework of selfistry because it's integral to us finding that compass that you named early on in our conversation, which is the primary goal of selfistry, is for the artistry of self to emerge from that inner compass, which is connected to source.
Mm-hmm. So source being, so yes, source being the consciousness, pure consciousness field, the source of everything, where everything is connected and one with, yeah, and one.
Yeah.
That being source. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Okay. So that's source. And, the important thing I think of my journey in retreat was to have, first of all, a cognitive understanding of that. And second of all, a fully embodied experience of that. So those are two things that I work with in the source realm. It's we look at stories about source, we look at our relationship to source, and then we look at our experience of or being source. So those are all really important depth work within that realm. The self realm is our matness, right? Our Sarah-ness, our unique, magnificent thing that we are. And in the selfistry system, what we do is we unpack that realm to identify, like Sam helped me identify that day we went shopping, that there is much in the self realm that is conditioned in me, that is habitual, that has nothing to do with orienting towards that compass that you and I are talking about. Couldn't give a hoot about source, right? It's all about self. And I want that new dress because I do. And it'll make me happy, maybe only for 10 minutes or 10 months, but I'll take it. So there's this whole exploration of the self realm where we identify so much of what we're functioning as is conditioned generationally. Even now we're coming to see that it's embedded in our DNA, some of our beliefs and our habits and our traumas and our addictions, and all of this is in the self realm. The self realm is the busiest realm out of them all. And now in 2023, we have so much scientific data about the nature of that realm as well, and how neural pathways work and what neuroplasticity can do. So it's a super rich area for us to peel away the habitual selves. I call them each selves, for a number of reasons. And I take that from Gurdjieff's work, who's another teacher I studied while I was in retreat. And so we unpack and discover, like, which ones are habitual. And instead of, and this is really important, instead of trying to exile them or fix them or transcend them, we weave them into our artistry.
Mm-hmm. Can I pause you there?
Go.
This is great, because wrapped up in that self are the addictions and the flaws and the things that I like about myself and the things that I don't like about myself that I'm trying to change. And you're saying all of that can be woven into the fabric of this being that we're existing as. You're saying it's not a good idea to actually try to suppress those things or transcend those things or anything like that, but actually there's something that's okay about having all of it.
And even hearing you feed that back to me, I can feel my whole nervous system relax. Like there's a sense of like, I'm not broken. I don't have to fix anything. Now, it's still true, but there's a lot of things I'm struggling with and I don't like about myself. I hear that. I hear those selves. They're in me as well still. But
Mm-hmm.
there's this sense of like, what if we didn't orient towards the self realm as something to fix or transcend, but rather we opened more space in the self realm for other selves to come forward?
Mm-hmm.
Like the self who wants to be connected to the compass, like the self who actually wants to be, fill in the blank, who wants to be a ballet dancer, but that got suppressed when she was 5 because her parents took her to modern dance instead. I mean, we all have our stories about what is dormant inside of us, right? And so there's an opportunity to know ourselves, that adage, know thyself, to know ourselves so fully that we make more and more room for the uniqueness that is us, is the individual self. And I'll add one more thing here, which is really important. When you study the neuroscience, and again, I'm not an expert, but I'm definitely a passionate student. When you study it, you learn that the neuroscience is showing the truth of no self as well. There really is no Sarah in here. There is a confluence of neurotransmitters that come together, spark, light, hit each other, blow up, whatever they do, that the consequence of that is a sense of coherence, of meanness. And this skin also reinforces that. So we hold that lightly as we do this practice. Any good meditation practice that isn't all about transcending, but is about integrating, will support the deepening into the recognition that there really is no self.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can you say a little bit more about that from a psychological perspective? Because I think that a lot of people will hear that, especially if maybe they're not familiar with the Buddhist concept of self, or not practicing a form of meditation, and they're like, "What do you mean? Like I'm definitely here. I exist." So, and I think that actually the neurobiological framework is really great. It's super helpful. But what about from like a psychological perspective? Like, what does that mean to not have a self?
well, let's use a story to help illustrate it. Let's go to Copernicus. So before Copernicus, humans believed that the earth was flat, and they believed that the sun revolved around the earth, right? And you and I still have this experience today. We wake up in the morning, that's east right there. The sun comes up, and I would swear on 8,000 Bibles I am not moving. This earth is not moving. That thing in the sky is moving. That is unequivocally my experience, right?
Yeah.
So, and then Copernicus comes along and he's like, hey, people, hate to break it to you, but that's not what's really happening. And so there was an adjustment in our psychology
Mhm.
to orient ourselves into a much bigger universe, right? And a much bigger understanding of our solar system and our planets and our planet and how it is in relation to the other planets in our solar system, etc. So I liken that to the self and no self um, paradox, let's call it, or polarity, maybe is a better word. In that, when we do deep meditation and when we look at the neuroscience and when we study the esoteric texts, we realize that, oh my God, there is no self. They're right. Kind of like the Copernicus thing, like, oh my God, the earth is the one moving, not the sun. And yet, we continue to have the very real, not illusory, the very real experience that there is a self here. And then the journey becomes how to inhabit that polarity of self and no self. Just like we have learned to inhabit the polarity of earth at the center, sun at the center, right? We still have the experience of the earth being the center of our experience and our lives. The sun moves, the planets move, the moon moves. We don't have a sensation of movement. And yet the truth is, and those of you who are just listening, I'm putting those into like those air quotes, right? The truth is we're not at the center. And the truth is we have the experience that we are.
Mm.
Same with self and no self. And this takes some time, just like it took generations to really metabolize Copernicus's realization and science and developments in science to prove that. Now, ancient texts and Eastern lineages have talked about no self since forever and how liberating it is. But if you met the Buddha, he wouldn't be like a delusional character who had no sense of, where his hands were, what he was eating or what he was doing. He still functioned as the Buddha, as a person and as himself, even though he knew that that self is relatively real. And there's something about that realization of relatively realness that opens the possibility for us to inhabit a fuller sense of self. It's almost counterintuitive, but it's incredibly liberating and real and true.
That's
Does
lovely.
that make sense?
Yeah, I love the
Okay.
metaphor you're using to illustrate that. I want you to sell me on it even more. Why would it be helpful for me or important for me to realize to see this polarity and to notice and see the non-self, but also appreciate it as being there? Like as a human being, why would I want to do that? Like I'm here, I am, I'm that, and I'm, you know, living my everyday life and things are good, things are bad sometimes. Like what's this all about? Why would I care about that?
Oh my gosh, you want me to sell it to you in 10 minutes. Okay,
Just
now let me
yeah, just
okay.
a light easy question. No
Yeah,
big deal.
really. Let's schedule about 20 more
Yeah.
podcasts, shall we? Um let's see how I would want to answer that. Well, let's go back to young Sarah, and maybe young Matt can relate to this, of searching, wanting that compass, right? So having a sense of being in the world and people are living their best life, having their, especially in the West now, right? There's so much focus on the individual and the psychology of the individual. Like just, work harder, the whole hustle culture, work harder, you can be your best self. And really you do want that nicer car, or okay, maybe now because you're in touch with climate change, maybe you want that nicer electric car, so okay, so there's all of this strategizing and there's all of this maneuvering to try and live our best life. So here I am, a young woman in my early 20s, and I'm confronted with this second pregnancy, and it's like, oh my God, I don't know to turn left or to turn right. I don't feel like my best life is in either of those directions, but I have to make a choice. And I would suspect that everybody listening right now can identify at least, if not numerous, moments in your life where you were standing at that inflection point. And from that place, if your question is, Mom, what's the right choice? Teacher, what's the right choice? Guru, what's the right choice? Priest, rabbi, imam. If you're going to search out there for the right answer, then you are set for staying on track with your life, because you already have faith in somebody else or some other teaching. And I have such deep respect for this, and even envy on some level at times. But for those of us who did not have that, and there are more and more of us, I mean, percentage wise, there's so many more people on the planet. I don't know if percentage wise that has increased. But I would say that if you're one of those people who are like, I can't just make the decision because somebody else told me, then I'll get a ticket to heaven, or then I'll be happy. So that inner compass, in order to access it, for me, there needed to be a period of time where I could quiet down all the different selves or parts of me or voices. Now, you're asking the question about the psychology, which is a beautiful question. In many psychological traditions, there's an invitation to explore different parts, right? And there's also, especially in transpersonal psychology and now in internal family system psychology, there's a lot of evidence towards the psychological gestalt or experience of many different parts of ourselves. And remember earlier, I was talking about how they kind of miraculously coordinate themselves into a sense of selfhood. But if we can cultivate, and now we're moving into the witness realm of Selfistry, if we can cultivate a calm, spacious awareness inside of us that can look at ourselves, all of them, including the one who thinks she's at the center of it all, right? If we can cultivate that and have that experience of no self, in my air quotes again, because there's still a sense of awareness and there's still a sense of me-ness, but it's not like me, Sarah. It's like me awareness or consciousness. I mean, there's so much more to unpack around that, but there's this opportunity in that space to recognize, this could be a relief actually, to let go of this sense of fixed selfhood and just open to all my different parts and see how they might want to coordinate with a connection to source, with a connection to some other life that's living us. Because I didn't consciously choose to get pregnant once or twice. First time, and both of them were with birth control. It wasn't like I was being stupid. It just happened, life happened. And so much of life is happening to us. Can I make a case that if we take the time to sit down, shut up, and listen, like Sam said, that eventually the desires to buy a dress or have, live my best life or become the next, king of the hill, or, even the simple desires, just have kids, have a family, feed them, just go out to lunch, whatever those desires are. If we can cultivate a space where they just recede into the background, then the question becomes, what's possible from here? What's possible from here?
So Sarah, thank you for that. That was, yes, enlightenment in 10 minutes or less, or 5 minutes or less.
Really? You think it landed? Where's, where did you?
No, so this is great.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the way that I'm seeing and understanding it, just to check with you, is like there's a self, and within this self, we experience a lot of suffering. There's all the desires there. There's Sarah, there's Matt, who wants these different things, wants to be the king of the hill, and this and that. And but there's these other elements. There's source, which we're connected to, but then there's this witness that can see the self happening. It can just observe it. And what really resonates with me about the selfistry model is that it's not saying, okay, we're going to try to destroy the self, all of these desires and everything, or break it down or transcend it or anything like that, but that we can actually look at it in all of its messiness and appreciate it and see that happening and just witness the witness part, witness all that happening. And that in itself can provide us a sense of relief from some of that suffering. There's some beauty in being able to observe that. And at the same time, like acknowledging that since we have that self, we can also work on self-improvement and trying to improve that thing. It doesn't mean that we just have to resign and accept exactly who we are, but it's like both. You can work on yourself and you can see that you're not a self at the same time. And that can provide some space for people to like come back to, especially when things are really hard, just to like have a sense of relief. And for me, it really connects. I feel more connected with just everything in that space. And there's a sense of like, it's all good. Like, it's all good.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I love it. I love just listening to you and getting to know you and your work and what you're up to. There's such a deep resonance with, at least generationally at this point in human history, that as East and West kind of collide. And this is again just naming the context within which we live, and so much of religion as it's being practiced and even psychology as it's being practiced doesn't quite scratch all the itches. There's for many of us um this longing for a more integrative approach, one that acknowledges our uniqueness and this magnificent gift of a human life, and also the opportunity to relax into what you're saying, that awareness, that capacity to witness it, and even softening deeper into the field of source itself. And how does that inform the artistry of our life? How does that inform what choices we make, or how we discern what is the best choice for us? Are we making those decisions from a self inside of us that is fixated on buying that dress, or are we making it from a sense of self inside of us that is longing to live a life at ease, connected, compassionate, creative, all the things we say we want, when they're coming from only the self realm, are doomed to fail and increase suffering.
Mhm.
But when they're integrated into a connection to the divine and a capacity to be self-aware, then the whole canvas changes and life gets really, really fun.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We are definitely going to have a part two of this conversation, but can I ask you one more question before we wrap up for today?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So it's related to what we're talking about here, because I want to take this and apply it to meditation. Um, some listeners might have a meditation practice or might be interested in meditating. And I have had this long-standing interest in meditation within our Western culture and how it fits into it and how we're approaching that meditation practice, and whether some of us, and this is me, I'm asking for a friend here, putting this in quotes,
I love it.
approaching this really with ego, like approaching this as like a self-improvement project, like just from your experience, and all of, can you share with us like the wisdom on approaching something like meditation, which on its face, like there's nothing. It's also great as a self-improvement project but for those of us who maybe find that it still leads to suffering in life, like what do you think is the balance there between like you know, wanting to improve your focus and improve your uh connection to your emotions and all of that stuff, but also like not being attached in any certain way to what happens? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. The first thing that comes up for me is to just take the long view and to remember that this is a lifelong journey. This is not something we figure out and we accomplish and then, wrap it up, we're good to go. So that's right there. There's a sense of relaxation, like, okay, long game. If you're not in it for the long game, you're not in the right game. The other thing I would say is that because we're not exiling, suppressing, or fixing any parts of ourselves or any selves in us, because we're not doing that, they're going to continue to have their self-improvement agendas. They're all going to still be, it's like having an orchestra inside of us. Every instrument is there, right? More than one self playing any and all the instruments. And if you've ever listened to an orchestra play that's not in tune, it's like you said, it's messy, it's chaos. And yet, as the instruments start to recognize each other, which is what the witness in us can do, we expand the realm of the self so that all of the instruments get to be a part of the orchestra, and each of them even get a solo. That's why we need the long view, because it takes time for everybody to get their desire met. But there's an opportunity there to allow for, okay, I can have my desires, my longings, my 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 aspirations in the context of a whole orchestra, not in the context of I'm the cello player and all you guys, you wind instruments and you drums over there. It's like I'm the boss and you're going to play for me or you're out of this orchestra, which is how most self-improvement selves orient. Like it's my way or the highway. And what we're doing here, and you'll hear the metaphor now is coming through, who's conducting this orchestra? That's where the witness comes in. The witness, you can view it as the conductor. And then you can say, well, what music is the conductor? Is it conductor going to play the music the cellist wants to play or the saxophone? And the answer is no, 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 no. The conductor is playing the music that source wants to play. And there's going to be some revolt from certain instruments in the orchestra because they don't want to play what source wants them to play. They want to play what they want to play. And so that's where the artistry comes in, where the conductor builds an intimate relationship with the cellist and says, hey, babe, listen, just try this. Because this is actually improvement, and this might actually give you what you want or satisfy you in some way. So there's ongoing negotiation and there's ongoing practice and listening, and the conductor's heart is so big, so big. It will hold that cellist through its revolts and its crying and its tantrums, and slowly but surely the cellist will find its place. And all the while, we return to identifying. If we're going to identify anywhere with consistency, I encourage people to identify as the witness, as that awareness. Ram Dass called it loving awareness, right? And he would say, your role, ROLE, is all the selves. Your soul, SOUL, is the witness, and source is awareness itself. So it's okay for you to say, I am loving awareness. I am the witness. Even though it's like the Copernicus thing, even you know there is no self, you're going to identify as the self that is the conductor of this orchestra of selfhood.
Mm.
And you're going to always be leaning into source because that's the music that wants to play itself through us. That's
Mm.
actually what's happening, from one perspective. Does that help?
That's really nice. And just, trying to stay with the metaphor here, it's almost like, yeah, source has the music that it wants to play. When the orchestra, when it sounds like a cacophony of sounds, this is feedback. This is suffering, basically. It's a feedback mechanism that we're not in harmony with the song that source wants to play. The witness is almost like the mediating mechanism between those two that's able to watch and say, oh, okay, yeah, like we need to shift here. There's it's watching and noticing that suffering is happening, which is feedback to, oh, we need to play some different notes here. And when it sounds beautiful, we're in harmony with source.
Beautiful. And the only thing I would add to that is a meta context of like, and when we're out of tune and cacophonous, that's okay too. That's
Right.
that's okay
Yeah, there's
too.
nothing wrong about that.
There's
Yeah, I
nothing
love
wrong.
that.
It's still music from source's perspective, but there is this longing to harmonize, to attune ourselves to that. And I think that's really the quest for enlightenment right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Very consistent with what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
Sarah, this has been awesome. And like I said, I have all these other questions that I'm going to have to save for you for a different time. But anything else that you wanted to add for today that we didn't cover?
Well, I am impressed by your questions and the quality of your questions, that we were able to really cover a lot of territory and condense into this 1 hour, barely, the framework of selfistry in a way that your listeners will be able to hear it and digest it and understand it. So I'm super grateful for that and feel complete in that regard. Yeah.
Awesome. Where can people find out more about you and your work and the retreats and workshops and everything that you offer?
Selfistry.com. Everything is there. Feel free to reach out to me personally through the website. I work privately with people. I do courses and retreats. And my passion right now is deep dives for a long period of time. So I'm running year-long programs. And I feel like, based upon everything you heard today and my orientation towards the long view and having a guide along the way is super important, that the short-term spurts tend to turn on a few of the selves, but don't have necessarily a lasting impact on the whole orchestra. And so I encourage people to come and meet me and get to know me and feel into if I could be that guide for you, and I'd be happy to do so.
Lovely. And I will definitely put those links in the show notes as well so people can reach out. Thank you so much. It was so good to see you.
Yes, you as well. Thank you again for a beautiful conversation.